Yes, please.
I'd be interested to know why you do what you do, what your personal objectives are. And I imagine that each of you has a number of objectives, and I'd be interested in if you could articulate a hierarchy. I mean, some of you might have a goal of social change. I mean, I think of Harriet Beecher Stowe or
Upton Sinclair.
The Upton Sinclair, yeah. Or some of you might want to mobilize a constituency in further of that objective. Some of you will just value the joy of creative expression. Some of you might want to comfort the afflicted or afflict the comfortable. And just curious as to what your primary objectives might be, if you're able to unpack them, because they probably often reside all together in a bundle.
I can answer about this one while you're thinking. Just for this, again, it is very personal because, in the mid-'80s, I had met this woman from Ecuador. We got married and moved to Ecuador, and I never would have picked an Ecuadorian character. But because one thing that had struck me at that time period, because, I was born in 1960, and I was at least conscious in '68 when, Martin Luther King was assassinated. And, I definitely saw this shift that you could no longer do the same stereotypes about African Americans, after that. They still come up in places and sitcoms and stuff, but, you really couldn't get away with a lot of the same stereotyping. But that 20 years later, you could still do it with Latinos. I mean, in the mid-'80s, I remember seeing a whole bunch of movies where, every Latino character was either the Colombian drug dealer or the maid who doesn't speak English, and who shows up in a car, in a lowrider with blasting music kind of thing. And so one of my goals, and there's all this, we are still dealing with, anti-Latino immigrant, racism. So one of my goals really was to try and make these people human for a white audience using, the popular genre of crime fiction. And as I said, no Latinos had problems with that. But like some white academics have called me on it, and one actually wrote in some book, it's as if he's writing Latinos for a white audience. Yes, right. An audience that doesn't recognize that they exist. Exactly. I was doing that, but she said it as if it was, again, like I'm somehow poaching someone else's territory. To reap the incredible rewards that are there for, for writing, politically ethnic-based, crime fiction. I think just, about that topic, though, and I'm sure you can bounce off this, was one thing about any writing, and in crime writing, I think there's sort of this interesting intersection. How can we write about others? I mean, you can't be a writer unless you have empathy for others. If you can't imagine, what if I'm not that person, but what if I were that person? And certainly from crime fiction, detective, I've talked to detective sergeants who say, well, that's how you solve a lot of crimes. You don't say, gee, what would I do? If it's not you. You're not the crackhead who just mugged an old lady. You have to think, okay, I'm a crackhead who just, mugged an old lady. Would I run down the subway, or would I, it's essential to be able to put yourself in someone else's shoes and imagine what life is like for them. That's what any writer has to do.
Well, I don't know. That gets a little deep into just why you write. I don't know if that's pretty. What do you think, S.J.? Are you?
Yeah, first of all, I love to write. I love to tell a story. But I get impatient. I got impatient with Columbine. I got really impatient when I read, years before that, when I read Bonfire of the Vanities. And I thought, who is this? Tom Wolfe can say whatever he wants about the Masters of the Universe, but who is he to write like this about the Bronx? He has no right. These people have no voice, and this is not their voice. And who is he? So I wrote a whole book,
What was that book?
Concourse, yeah. I wrote a whole book about what really happens in the Bronx. I get impatient, and I want to show people what I see. Now, I may not see any more of the truth than Tom Wolfe sees, but I don't think he is about telling the truth, and I try. Besides trying to write well, which I think is essential, whatever you do to do it well, but besides that, I want to ask questions. I don't have a lot of answers to what we should do about these things, even though I claim to know how come they happen, you know. But you know, I can tell you why Columbine happened, but if the answer is not to eliminate football all over America, then what is the answer? You know, I don't know, but I'd like to ask the question so people can read the book and say, gee, this is an interesting issue. It's different from what I thought, and maybe somebody else can come up with the answer. One other thing I want to say is that in the Lydia Chin character, I feel the same way Ken does with his Ecuadorian character. I cannot believe the level of Asian stereotyping that goes on, and especially about Asian women. You know, that they're either karate experts or dragon ladies, you know, or
Tiger moms
or buck-toothed computer geeks, and that's it, you know. And it drives me up the wall. And so, as long as I'm writing an Asian character, I want to write her and her friends and her acquaintances as the Asian Americans whom I know. So that's part of it, is just to show, you know, who these people are. I guess that's also, you know, my same thing about the Bronx, to show who these people really are.
Sorry
to get on a tangent, but what do you think of Richard Price's writings about the Bronx?
I think he's great.
Okay.
Yeah. You in your attacks on the comfortable, are they? They're clearly, you have a political motivation in that.
Sure. I mean, part of the problem sometimes is trying to, like, I feel like a lot of what I feel is not politically correct.
Like what?
Huh?
Like what? No, I'm teasing. Let's not go there.
No, it's just like it's hard to explain. I think I want to show something besides the politically correct line that also is part of a larger reality, and something, you know, that is so painful. It's nice to sort of get a handle on the pain by sort of trying to make a little toy out of it.
It's a bit like Doonesbury. He ventures into areas with great boldness, and
especially this week.
Meg, you have something to say on this? Or?
On why? It was more like a present. It was like, you know, the first book was like, this is here, this is what I'd like to, this is what I'd like to read in my next class, you know, to my kids. And also, I guess, you know, this book falls in a rather traditional line of political children's books, which is the children's political books that just say some other part of the culture than what is standardly talked about is beautiful, you know, and that's become sort of safe, even though it, you know, there weren't any about Puerto Rico. There wasn't one about Puerto Rican kids, but it's a sort of standard format. Now the follow-up about now we have to move to the Bronx for no reason. That gets into a less popular form of political children's fiction. So,
was that book published, but not by these people? Or
no, that book hasn't been published, and I'm in this dilemma because if she doesn't want to publish it, it really should be the companion piece to this book. So I'm willing to have any advice about that, because I am a young writer in the world of writing, and it's confusing to me. So I just don't know, you know, I could go to PM and I adore them, and I'm quite sure I could work something out with them. But then this book and that book would have to be two different books, and she'd have to be named something else.
Well, let's go off the piss in a moment about publishing for a little while.
Oh, yeah,
that always takes up a lot of time. Yes, please.
Oh, I'd like to just comment on the politically correct part and the notion of writing up or writing down. I was a performer like 35 years before I started writing, and I tried to write when I was young, and just filled in books and junk. But until I started using my acting facility to write with, so that I would assume a character and let that character speak, right? So, I mean, I think that the idea of writing up or writing down is kind of silly, because if you can't see the character through his own eyes, no matter who. I mean, I grew up, the burr under my saddle. The reason I write is I grew up in Eastern Virginia, a very rural place before Brown versus Board of Education. So the world I grew up in was Old South, Jim Crow, all the way. And my father was a Klansman, and I was a pretty big guy. I was in high school before this even became questioned. And, I was a sophomore in high school when Brown versus Board of Education came there. So now I'm writing mostly about my life before I was 13 years old. So I'm writing my father, he's a Klansman, but I'm just showing the world through his eyes. I mean, I'm not commenting on it. I'm just letting him show the world that he sees. My mother, the big, rich guy who owned most all the land around there. I write through his eyes, but he sees himself as a fine person, and I have to support him in that. If there's any political error, it's for the reader to pick up. That book is not going to tell you what's wrong.
Yes.
No, I was going to say, I think that's absolutely essential. That I forget who it was who said every man has his own good reasons. You have to be able to inhabit each of your characters. That this evil gallery owner thinks of himself as doing what he does for good reasons, and you have to give that to all your characters, or they're not real. Also, what are we trying to? We're trying to connect with each other. We're trying to connect with people outside. If we just sit here and talk to the left like we do this weekend, if this is all we do, then what's the point? We're trying to reach beyond ourselves. So yeah, I think it's absolutely essential to understand why the people who do things we don't like do them.
I'd like to just make a comment just about one of the, I played a lot of villains when I was a big, young, ugly guy, tough looking guy.
Mm-hmm.
So I played villains all my young life. And it became my rule that if you want to know that I'm a villain, you've got to find out for yourself. I'm not going to tell you.
Yeah, because in your heart you're not a villain.
Oh no, when I play the villains, I mean I think I'm charming. I think I'm Cary Grant. I think I'm Jesus Christ walking.
Well, yes, Laura.
I just want to raise one other point about this whole question of writing in the voice of a third world person. Is it kind of challenges the paradigm that drives me crazy of the stories about South Africa seen through the eyes of the heroic white journalist, and the stories of the civil rights movement told through the white person brave enough, which I'm not taking away from that. Those people are great. I mean, hopefully we are all those people too, but it's like, it's the obverse of the situation where most mainstream literature, even liberal, in this country, can't tell a black story, a Guatemalan story, an Ecuadorian story, through the eyes of the people who live them. They have to tell them through the eyes of a white observer. All that being said, I'm wondering if I want to learn about the point of view of Ecuadorians, maybe I would read something about, it's just different. I think the reasons why you choose as white people to write in those voices are slightly different, maybe, are more about telling white people about something about other cultures than it is about, speaking, like if I read Man, Child in the Promised Land or something, I'm learning something different. But I really congratulate you on that, because I think it really does bust open that really annoying tendency in this country of if you're going to feel something about South Africa, you have to feel it through another white person. You can't identify with them.
You had a comment.
Yeah, or a question. I know, Ken, you had raised a point. I know S.J. feels this way, that you can't have a character giving a long speech, a political speech. It's boring. We're storytellers. You're storytellers. But I want to ask, I wonder if any of the writers here could imagine writing a novel, crime novel maybe, where it takes the point of view of the Occupy movement, that what the 1% or the 1/10 of 1% have been doing is immoral and should be illegal, and probably is illegal. There probably is a law against it somewhere. Could you have an investigator that investigates the crimes of the 1% as a class and wants to bring them to justice, which would be like tilting windmills, maybe. It may be a fool's journey, but is that a credible story in your mind?
Does it all the time.
How can you raise the occupying fiction?
Not in terms of the entire class, because it becomes something people can't connect with. All stories are personal, need to be personal. And so what you need is to be able, and Sarah Paretsky does this all the time, but you need to be able to reveal the criminal underpinnings, the organizational and cultural underpinnings through a crime against an individual, which then is investigated by an individual, and things just open and open and open. You know what? True Confessions, John Gregory Nunn does this on an enormous level, and in the end, everybody who was in power has fallen through the murder of one prostitute. But you cannot. I don't think. I can't imagine a circumstance under which you could. I would want to read a book about about a class action suit, essentially. What you want to read is about the murder of the lawyer who was bringing the class action suit. Why somebody would. That's my.
Yeah, I was going to say that makes me think of what Susie was saying about you want to add a little more, like the story you're talking about, where you reveal the crimes of the 1% in the Occupy movement. If my immediate reaction as a fiction writer saying the story I'd want to write is about a cop who's attacking the Occupy movement, because I think one of the things you get into politics as action to me is very binary. It's like it's a clash between two sides. Fiction tends to work against that. You have to have sympathy for everybody there. And what you said about being an actor means a lot to me, because you also have to block it. You got to direct the fucking thing. You have to block it. You have to know where people's hands are and where they are in the room. And fiction writing is more about surprises. And you don't want your political action. It is about surprises, but you hope it won't be. And so there's a difference there for me. And I just want to say one other thing. You were talking about the voice and taking on somebody else's voice. It never occurred to me as a hierarchy thing. Of course, I'm the default character in fiction. I'm a white guy. When I taught writing, that was one of the first things I would try to teach to kids that want to learn writing, is there's a default narrator. And if it's, and one way you defeat that is by using you say it's a he or you say it's a she, or he's black or white. In general, in fiction, if it's not identified, it's a white guy, And
absolutely.
so you have to know that kind of so you can work against it. And I don't know, that's all. But I just wanted to, and then I'll shut up. I remember when Nat Styron wrote, William Styron wrote Nat Turner, and he got a lot of crap for that. And I didn't like the book, and I didn't really respect him for it, because there was a book called 10 Black Writers Respond to William Styron, and all of them made the point that we are not saying that a white Southerner can't write about, it's what you're saying and what you're doing that we're criticizing, not the fact that you're this white guy. They all made that point, and he responded as if he was being criticized for what they said they weren't doing, which I thought was beneath him. So, yeah, in blue.
Is it harder when the character's closer to you, like you writing about your dad, than somebody who's a little distant?
Is it harder what?
If the character's closer to your experience, like him writing about his dad, is that harder or easier?
Who's close to your dad?
I mean close in terms of your having had to experience them for many years, not close in the positive sense.
Hey, that's a really interesting question.
Yeah, it's too interesting to pursue.
I find it almost impossible to write about myself, but I think that has to do with self-revelation. I can write about other people whom I know, and I don't think it's a cultural, I don't find Lydia, because she's Chinese, easier than when I do write about a Jewish character. But that is that's kind of at the heart of why you write fiction, you know, which is so you can tell the truth without revealing anything, in a way.
Exactly.
You know?
No, it's it. No, that's, you had a question.
Yeah. This is not what I thought it was going to be. There's like at least 4 panels in this time period that said Occupy. So I was thinking, oh, I'll take a break from electoral politics for a little while and go to an Occupy thing. And but I very much, it was a nice surprise because I enjoyed all your readings and I found some new authors to read. I'm glad of that.
And if you ask a good question, you get a free.
Yeah, no, I will.
Come
But
on,
I just wanted
pressure.
to preface it a little bit because, like, I'm a boomer. And I feel like the world I grew up in and the social contract that obtained when I was growing up has basically almost disappeared. And it's like, you know, the Soviet Union fell apart. The communist Chinese are the best capitalists on the planet. And, you know, the media keeps saying things are getting better, but more and more people that I know are out of work than ever before. And, you know, the cops need a warrant, still need a warrant to come into my apartment, but the military could show up and bust the door down. Or the president could send a drone through my window. And it's just like, it just seems like everything is getting more and more topsy-turvy. And I feel like the Occupy movement is kind of at a place where it's going to evolve into something else. Because they're not going to let the encampments, you know, they've basically destroyed them. And I think next time if they start up again here in the spring, they're just going to shut it down immediately. They're not going to let it try to play itself out. So, but my question to any one of you that want to address it would be like, you know, you all write in different genres pretty much. And I mean, I think, you know, we need help from people who make their livings through their imaginations to kind of see where the next thing could be. I'm not asking you to become political commentators, but just if you see a way that, you know, for all of us, that there could be something, you know, because I think we all need help with, because we're all still so inundated with what we've known, to see the next thing that might be possible. And I don't know, I have the faintest idea how to do that. I play with that in my own mind sometimes. But it would just be like a really good thing, like Terry, what you said about showing something about the Occupy movement from the viewpoint of a cop. That's very interesting. Or
Say that, yeah.
okay. Yeah, but I just feel like you know, going on what something Susie said, like reality is attacking more and more people every day, and I just feel like I don't know what the answer is.
Well, is that a good question or not?
I
Are you
don't know.
blaming us, or-
Sorry.
I find it a little broad.
Yeah,
But no, you phrased it so well. I mean, it's like all the ironies we live with. It's like we just to finesse going to work and coming back, you have to like go through so many series of balancing acts and compromises and stuff. And everybody will have a different answer at any time during the day, which I think maybe is why fiction is useful. It doesn't present the answer. It may be an answer, and it'll free you for a minute, and then maybe it'll lead you to something that you can, you know, answer. But I mean, basically what I do is look at what's wrong and try to make sense of it. And I find that the hardest thing to do is to visualize something better. You know, the left is so good at criticizing, and we suck at really becoming more optimistic and seeing, you know, what might work. And even if it doesn't work, just to sort of like each other better.
We were actually talking just before coming up here about wondering if we were going to get into this, because one of the issues we sort of have is often, since we do write, again, you know, they're not political tracks, but at least, you know, in my case, it's not these passages from the newspaper, which she doesn't do all the time, that make it political. It's the attitude that permeates the book on every page. And in fact, an anecdote is, gasp, 20 years ago, when I'm still unpublished, you know, with 23 Shades of Black, I actually got a phone call from an editor at a large, you know, one of the big six, which of course now I realize that means incredible interest. I mean, an editor calls you, for God's sakes, saying, you know, we loved your feisty female character, because this was 20 years ago and there weren't that many, you know, there weren't at the time. And you know, the gritty realism, there's just one problem: cut the politics. And it was an earlier draft, and I said, I know what you mean. There are a couple of passages where she gets on a soapbox and gives a speech. I'll cut those. And she said, it's not really a matter of a couple of passages. It's pretty much every sentence. And I'm sitting going, you love the book and the character and the gritty realism, but you want me to change every sentence in there. And she couldn't come right out and say it, but it became clear during the conversation that what she meant was essentially, there's not that many feisty women characters. Again, it was 20 years ago, before a lot of others, and you sure can write, make her white and we'll make $1 million. What is this with the Ecuador?
Or keep her Ecuadorian, but make her a cop fighting crime and not, and not seeing where crime comes from.
She said, cut all that other stuff and stick to the story. And I said, the other stuff is the story. But where I was going with that was, one of the problems we face is when we say, okay, we've got these sort of politically, even though, as I say, they're not tracks, but they're politically engaged characters, socially conscious crime fiction, and we try to get activists to pay attention, and so many of them say, oh, I don't read fiction. Because that's not serious. Non-fiction's about changing the world. And you want to say, okay, there's no longer going to be a book like Uncle Tom's Cabin, bad as it is, or The Jungle, that, a book isn't going to do that. But okay, movies, narrative is about humanizing somebody you might not have thought about otherwise. I mean, just in my own class at Suffolk Community College, for example, sometimes I start off with a short story called The Prophecy by an Indian author, whose last name is Apachana, and it's got all of these foreign words. It takes place in India, and there's these foreign words like scooterwalla in there. But the story is about two 17-year-old girls, and one of them's pregnant, and they're trying to figure out what the hell to do. And you can bet every young woman in my class relates immediately, in a way that they didn't think they would. So that, to me, that's what fiction, whether narrative, let's call it, whether it's film, television, or in print, that's what we aim for. It's like humanizing someone you never would have thought about and realizing, oh yeah, look at that, this is the same thing. So I just think that's an issue, that there's so many activists who just, fiction, that's frivolous.
Well, but that you're not.
We don't get involved.
You're not going to do it. You're not going to stop that. I mean, if people aren't interested in fiction, they're just not. Well, and I don't think that's what's wrong with the movement. In a way, I think that the idea that we can't see a better future because anything that happens that gives us a glimmer of a better future, if we believe in it, we're sort of selling out, because nothing actually happens unless the larger power structure allows it to happen. And I think that's the pervasive attitude.
That's not true.
No, it's not. It's absolutely not true. But I think that in general we feel like we're not allowed to applaud a new environmental law or that kind of thing because it's after all a law passed by Congress, and Congress is bad people, and and so we can't. There's these compromises we make every day, and I think that's part of what's wrong.
Well, there is I mean, I'm a science fiction writer, and I have been for 30 years. Science fiction is about the future, and science fiction is in many ways, it's an explicitly political genre, in a way.
Just the fact that it exists, yeah.
Well, and also it's, it can be either dystopian or utopian. So that doesn't make it any easier to do. I've thought myself, I love the Occupy movement and all that kind of stuff. I said, I should really think of a way to write about that. Well, I haven't figured it out, So it's not like science fiction can deal with, but it is an explicitly political literature in a certain way, and not about characters. I was going to say that this thing that what fiction does is humanize characters. Not all fiction, that's not really what science fiction's about. It can do that, but its primary job is to present an idea. At least that's how I see it, So I don't think, we stumbled on this idea, or somebody gave it to us, that the primary thing in a political piece of work is the voice, the narrative voice. And I think that's absolutely right. I hadn't thought of that. But and then we got into that old turkey about can white people write about third world people and all that. And that's been going on since the 60s, I think. And rightly so. It was right of people to raise it. But I've never, I came along late enough in the game where it never, that one one didn't bother me that much. But then, you know.
I have to admit it, when I started, it never crossed my mind that anybody would have a problem with it. But it also never crossed my mind that most, because, you know, women wrote about men all the time, and, you know, but it didn't cross my mind that nobody did this in the first person. And I think it's a big difference when you say I as opposed to he.
It probably is. And I wouldn't dream of writing about a young black man in Oakland, where I live right now. I wouldn't have no idea to get close to it. But I wrote a novel about the Civil War, which most of the story was told from the point of view of a 11-year-old black slave. But the key to that was, or what I didn't even think about it, but it was written from the point of view of a 65-year-old doctor who was remembering when he was an 11-year-old black slave. It was the easiest thing I ever wrote. Somehow, a 65, and I wasn't 65 at the time, I was like 35. But the idea of the 65-year-old guy writing about when he was 11, it was the easiest, and I think it came out pretty well. But somehow you just luck into somehow that one worked. I would never write about a Chinese detective. What do you think of Walter Mosley? Fabulous. As a political crime writer.
I think as a political writer, I have problems with him actually as a writer, but as a political writer, I think he's terrific, because I think he does that same thing. He doesn't write politics. He presents a story, but it's a story that could not take place without the politics of the situation in which his characters live, and they have to work their way through the power structure, the way, I presume you're talking about the Easy Rollins stories and not the science fiction books, but the way Easy Rollins is always being pressured by white people to deal for them in the black community is not only brilliant, but it's real, you know? And he has to find a way to get what he wants out of life while not, you know, while keeping them from screwing him, which they will do if he doesn't do their dirty work. And that is inherently a strong political statement.
Absolutely.
To write those stories. I think part of the answer for what you're asking is for us in the choice of subject matter, just what it is, and which is where in the genres, I think, I just want to make my little genre pitch here, because the genres will do this in a way that literary fiction won't necessarily. The genres will take on social issues.
At least these days.
These days, yeah, we're
Used
nimble and we're faster. Yeah, literary fiction used to do it. It doesn't do it as much. And we will. Noises from the front row.
Mengistu. I mean, do you know Mengistu? Some of the immigrant.
The immigrant literature, yes.
Amazing.
Yes, I'm talking with you, but that is not what you would call these days mainstream. A lot of that is still,
anything that gets reviewed in the New York Times Book Review on Sundays.
Mainstream, right.
I agree with Laura, and also the women's book clubs pick them up too.
Yes, yes.
But I think you're all too modest, because as a reader of fiction and someone who's very concerned about and even involved in Occupy, I think, and I guess I felt it the most strongly in some ways listening to your story. I was like smiling and laughing, and oh, someone's taking care of me. It's just comfort, number one. But not just comfort, not like, oh, you're okay, but raising, and you've all been saying it about truth and all this stuff, but as someone who is a revolutionary, I mean, and that's even huger than just how are we going to get them to close Guantanamo. That's like, and I am a voracious fiction reader, and I feel like I need it because it opens my mind. It shows me a deeper way of looking at my own passions, and and that's to me a great book, even if the plot's not so great or something, where there's a sentence where I go, it takes your breath away. And I think why I think it's linked to Occupy is my sense of Occupy is it is really alive and well. It is so not over. And why I think it's alive and well is because if you go down to this place, the Atrium on Wall Street, 60 Wall Street, which is where people meet any night of the week, there are these groups of people meeting, hashing out, and it is painstaking, and it is exciting, but it's also exhausting. And no one knows fully what to do. None of us does. I mean, we thought for a while, oh, we'll be like Cuba. We'll have socialism like that. You know, I mean, we don't know. But if we're not going to figure it out, no one else is either. I mean, and I don't mean just the people in this room. I mean all of the 99%. And so part of that process is to be helped in how you think. And that's what I think fiction does, in some ways more than nonfiction, or can do.
This fiction, in my, I'm going to hijack your comment just for a minute, because in my view, nonfiction is about reality, but fiction is about truth.
Yeah,
It illuminates a narrow and deep moment, as opposed to the broad picture, and that can give you, paradoxically, a sense of the larger.
Yeah. Or if it's satire, it cheers people, and they feel like. Can I just say one more thing? I read mostly in prison. Okay, I was in prison with who's in prison? Black women and Latino women, but a lot of black women who were sharing books, and it was like someone sees me. You know, there's my reality. It's different. It's this guy. All this stuff. It's a way of saying to people who are oppressed or who are voiceless, here you are. So I think it is a very powerful thing, and I think you guys, should, you're very modest.